You are listening to Fika with Vicky on United Public Radio, 107.7 and 105.3 from New Orleans.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Rhett, and welcome to Fika. Our guest today is Rhett Gervais. He's a science fiction and fantasy author, having written the very gritty dystopian Children of the Spear, a fantasy based on ancient Rome called The Last Witch of Rome, and he even has a new series coming out, The Grace Harbor Mysteries. He'll tell us more about that later. Rhett cut his storytelling teeth as a dungeon master in Dungeons and Dragons gaming sessions, and I believe that this is why his world building is so concrete. There is a foundation. There are boundaries. So even though it may become fantastical, those limits allow us to believe, and they're believable. Make them believable. I discovered Rhett in a Facebook promotional ad where the artwork on his book Chosen was so incredible that it forced me to break something we're always told, never to judge a book by its cover. So I did, and I ordered it. And all this time later, I'm still enjoying his books. I'm still reading them, and he's back for a second Fika. So welcome to Fika, Rhett.
Thank you so much, Vicky. How you doing?
I'm doing good. And yourself?
Great. Keeping busy, working hard. Lots of different writing to do. Trying to get it all done, and that's the hardest part, is actually doing all the writing you have to do. We writers have a million ideas and the time to only do a couple. So I do my best to try to actually get the books done, because people are harassing me to publish books.
Yes, I hate it. So number one in that statement, it is work. And, it's not like you can just go off somewhere and just go boom, 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 boom. I mean, it's work. You have to sit there day in, day out and make those words flow. So sometimes it goes good and sometimes it goes not so good, right?
Exactly. So, we do have to. I'm half and half. I'm a bit of a pantser and a bit of a plotter, meaning I do some plotting, but a lot of it is by the seat of my pants. I have an idea of where the story's going, what's going to happen. I know who the characters are, what their motivation is, and ultimately where I want them to end up. But a lot of the stuff in the middle, it is by the seat of my pants. It comes up as I'm writing it. And there are days where I can write 3,000 words and it comes all nice and easy. And there are days I suffer to write 250 words. So it can be quite interesting trying to put it all together.
So I'm going to mess around with my plotting here for this show and go down the list. I promised myself that I would never push writers anymore and for my next book. Okay. But I do have to ask, do you have an idea of when number 4 is going to come?
Okay, so The Last Witch of Rome, which is the story about Vesper, who is an African witch who is a slave during the era of Commodus in ancient Rome. That series, we've got 4 great books out, a prequel novella, and 3 main books in the series. We have a 4th and a 5th book that will be coming out hopefully before the middle of the year. I had hoped to be finished book 4, Invictus.
And I had hoped you would be finished.
My goal when I started it was having it ready for Black History Month, and I have utterly failed at that. I have pulled a George R.R. Martin, and I've just kept writing and writing. And what has ended up happening is I now have a 4th and a 5th book as opposed to just a 4th. But editing all of that into a coherent narrative can be quite difficult sometimes. So I will have hopefully I'm hoping by mid-April I will have fully edited out book 4, and actually by June you'll also have a book 5. I
Okay.
also have enough material for another prequel book in that series, which will be about one of the more interesting character, Lilith, who is Vesper's mother. So there's a lot of material that I need to sort of build out from.
Spinning off on her own, Lilith?
Yes.
Like, is she going to develop her own series? Now,
Yeah.
will the Last Witch of Rome series continue? Or
I
are
have
we
I really do see 5 or 6 books total in that series. Um, how because it is historical fantasy, and I do follow the timeline of the reign of Emperor Commodus, which is about a 20-year period of time, not a 20-year period, about a 10 to 15-year period of time. Like eventually Commodus does die historically, and I would like to follow along with historically how and why he dies in the series. That was
and so
always the
therefore
goal.
the villain is
Um,
gone and
yes.
they've
Yeah.
superhero wise.
Well, the thing I hate in TVs and books and movies
When they
is that,
keep going.
the main villain has been dead and they just keep going and they make up something completely new. And it's, you know, I don't think it's fair to the reader. There's nothing more satisfying as a reader to actually have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and have that evolution of a character. And hopefully, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but have that character go off into the sunset, live happily ever after. So you at least you have that satisfaction. Obviously, one of the great things about serial writing is that you do develop a lot of different characters over the course of 5 or 6 books, and you can keep that world going, but with different characters. And that's probably what is going to happen. As I've gone through creating this world, I've realized that Lilith does have a story to tell also. I think that's where the series may continue, or I just may spin it off as a completely new series with her as the protagonist. So that's where we're going with The Last Witch of Rome.
Yeah, so
But
we
we've,
can expect 2 to 3 more books and then a
yes,
prequel for the Lilith series.
yes. At the
Now,
very least, that,
I was gonna say Lilith, for obvious reasons, is not one of my favorite characters, but I could see how there's a lot of space there between, there's a lot of space there for a story to be created for her. Like, I can see that. Like, maybe making her one of my favorite characters. I don't know.
well, just because she does bad things doesn't mean she's not a good person.
Oh, or was a good person, or well, see, this is the thing that a lot of people don't understand, though. I don't have like, I as a reader, what do you think of this, Rhett? I don't have to like the main character to like a book or series. Say, for example, from television, Mad Men, or they were. He was not a nice guy, right?
He
But
was
that was
not a
the.
nice. Don Draper was not a nice guy.
But that was a fantastically written series.
Yes. So always, we have to remember, you don't always have to like the main character. You just have to find them interesting.
That's
There
right.
are some pretty despicable characters out there that have been character leads, and you love to hate them, or you love to see them suffer. And I think that making characters too perfect or flawless or too likable, even, can be a detriment to the reader, because we're all secretly quite flawed, and we like to see ourselves a little bit in the protagonist. So whatever flaws we have that are reflected in the protagonist can make it for an interesting read, and often a read you can't put down, right? Because you can relate.
And why they got to be the way they are. They might have started off like the nicest person, but I feel like that some days as I get older. I'm not sure I would be the nicest character.
Well, we all start, but hang on a second. We all start off wanting to do the best we can. However, circumstances force us sometimes to make choices we may not necessarily be proud of, and there's nothing wrong with that. We can't always be the nice person because those people tend to get walked all over or taken advantage of. So just because you stand up for yourself or you speak sternly, right? I think a great example of that is, Sheldon Cooper in The Big Bang Theory. Sheldon is a good person. He just speaks very bluntly, right? He says what he thinks and he says what he feels. And I admire the character for that.
Oh, I love Sheldon. Yeah. No, I
He's
can.
not a nice guy.
No, but I agree with him a lot. So I don't know what that says about me, but no, he's a fabulous character. Sheldon is a fabulous character, and once again, developed along the line of the story.
Yes.
So, which brings me, you said you're part pantser and part plotter.
Yes.
So when you say you plan ahead, you said, that Commodus only reigned for this many years.
Yes.
And that he died. So you knew this.
It's not a surprise. It happened 2,000 years ago.
It's not a spoiler.
There's no surprise. There's no spoilers there.
Based on history, we'll do that while we're watching a show, right? Or did this really happen? And
I think the more of the surprise to the reader is how it happens and why it happens. I think the evolution of the characters of Vesper. And of course of Narcissus, who is her love interest in the series, how these two characters evolve and become the people who they are by the end, really will be the surprise and the telling aspect of it. For those people who haven't read the series, one of the core elements that we bring in is this notion of connection between people from very different, far-reaching parts of the globe. Narcissus is ultimately a Celt, from the north, and Vesper is African from, the continent of Africa. But yet these two people make this wonderful connection, and they drive and change one another. And this is how things go in the real world. We meet very different people from different parts of the world, and we form these connections that, we never knew we expected or weren't even looking for. And so this is one of the topics and the trends that come up a lot in this series, is that we find these connections we're never really looking for, never really expecting, but they produce some pretty surprising results.
I was actually thinking about that when I was recently reading the third actual book, and I was thinking about the fact that it's sort of, the goal is more important than the individuals.
Yes.
That these are very sacrificing individuals, noble per se. And I find that tends to go along. I just think that's a part of the way you think, Rhett. Because we all put those little lessons in there, right? And I'm like,
absolutely.
Okay, so but no, it does. And that falls along lines. We don't think about people traveling in ancient times like that. Like we have this idea that everybody was in a certain place. But with Rome, there was everybody from every corner of Africa. And
Rome was New York. Rome was London. Rome was Paris. Everyone went there, right? This is the center of commerce in the world at the time, and people will travel vast distances and not see their families for years and months at a time to do business, to experience something new. And you had people, I'd say it, but the Romans conquered most of the known world, and that included most of Northern Africa, almost all of Europe, parts of Asia. They had control over Egypt, the Nile. This was a vast empire. So what ends up happening is you have this wonderful cosmopolitan melting pot, right, of all these interesting cultures. And what the Romans did and why they were so successful in actually expanding their empire and maintaining peace throughout that expanded empire is they actually franchised being Roman. So they franchised the notion of the centurion and their army and governors and things like that. And when they came and they conquered you, they also established commerce and peace right? Giving you a quality of life that probably did not.
Stop liking it.
It's true. It's true.
They taught us a lot of bad habits, those Romans. I think
Hey, the first fast food restaurants were Roman, you know.
and how we will. Okay, I want you, because obviously we discussed this before. You did a lot of research before doing
Yes.
a fantasy novel, and people don't think about that. They think you're doing fantasy, just which I want to get to. But Brian has an interesting question, so we'll bring it up here. You have a rich, intricate series. How do you keep track of events, places, and people? Do you use timeline software or pen and paper?
So I have a series Bible, right? Almost like character sheets from Dungeons and Dragons.
I was going to ask that exactly, because I said he has. Okay, Brian, just give me a second here. Just have to ask him this. Have you ever rolled a dice in your writing? Have you ever?
No, I have not. But it may be a good idea. It may be a good idea.
So when you get stuck, just roll. Their power is.
Well,
But,
here's the thing. I have one of my favorite books about writing is called On Writing. It's by Stephen King. And one of his suggestions is anytime you ever get stuck, kill somebody. That's what, and that's what I've, yes. So
when you
there
think
was a
about it, he must
famous,
get stuck a lot.
he does. He does. So his most famous application of that was in The Stand, where he ended up completely stuck, not sure what he wanted to do. And so he just blew people up. And while I don't go to that extreme, sometimes shaking the story up and changing the events and the narratives, definitely beyond the character's control, can drive a story forward. So if you keep a story static and you try to keep in the same, this is why you cannot plot all the way. You do have to do some pantsing, is it allows time for the characters to express themselves and do the crazy things that human beings do. I don't consider to have created these characters. I consider that I express for them, right? So once the ideas that they've been put in the world of these characters exist, there are times where they do things that I'm even surprised at. That didn't come from me. It's because I know who this character is. I know how they think and how they behave. And sometimes they do things that you don't expect. But as long as it keeps in their personality, I let it happen.
So do you keep those character sheets on paper with pen, or do you use a program?
No, I have it on I have in Google Docs, I have an entire biography for each character, things they've done, interesting elements of their personality. There are quirks. There are also deeper thoughts, stuff that's not necessarily expressed on the paper, but they're the characters' deeper thoughts, their dreams, their hopes. And sometimes it comes through in the story, but a lot of the time it expresses in their actions and why they do certain things, right? So yes, I have character sheets. I guess that's the best way of doing it.
I knew you would. Okay, does that answer your question, Brian? You can always, if you need more, let us know. So yes, character sheets, Dungeons and Dragons. And
I am embarrassed.
I'm wondering if that is why your writing is so formed, because you're used to having to defend it. Like if you're playing a game and you come up with something that wipes people out, they're going to be a little argumentative about it, right?
Exactly. So whenever you have, whenever you're, especially as a dungeon master, back in the day, right? You have to remember you're dealing usually with people who are very intelligent, creative, right? So if you present them with a scenario, right, if you want to actually have it be successful, there have to be rules. There has to be a way for them to, how do I put this? It's important that you set a playing field and let people play, but there must be boundaries also, right? If you're a fighter with a sword, right, you're not going to suddenly have magic, right?
Exactly.
If you only know how to use magic and someone attacks you with a sword, well, you're not going to be able to fight them with the sword. You have to figure it out, right? So, as an example, Vesper uses magic to help her fight, but she's never going to be as strong or as capable as Narcissus, who's a natural fighter. He's big, he's strong, he can beat people with his bare hands and does it very well. So, establishing early on what the characters can do, making sure that they do have limitations, uh, makes it feel grounded, makes it feel realistic. If all of a sudden characters can do something completely out of character that they didn't learn somehow in the story, then your reader's not going to follow along with you. You're going to lose your reader because they're going to say, well, that's impossible. That doesn't make any sense. So once you've established the rules, you've got to follow them.
So I was right, and Vicky was right.
Vicky was right.
I have to hear that once in a while. Just too bad.
It's so satisfying,
like
isn't it?
I play a game here, okay? Like I throw out an idea, and it's like, yes, that was, because I can almost see that, and I am so aware of that. It drives me crazy in fantasies where it's just like, woo, and it's like, no, that doesn't work. Doesn't work.
As someone who's a writer, almost all writers start off as people who love the genre that they're writing in, right? If you are a mystery writer or if you're a science fiction writer, there's a good chance you loved books about those things. And one of the things that always irritated me in fantasy is when they completely broke the rules. All of a sudden at the last minute, there's some ridiculous deus ex machina that explains the whole thing. Well, that's not really fair to the reader, right? The reader wants the character to figure it out, come up with something creative, but based on the limitations that you've placed on the character. And that makes it far more satisfying. And sometimes characters lose. Sometimes they get their ass kicked. And that's okay to happen too. Someone else can come in and save them. There can be extenuating circumstances. And that's okay too. That will drive the story forward. And especially in the first two books, Vesper gets her butt kicked a lot. These characters don't win. Commodus is the emperor of Rome. He has an enormous amount of power, and they do the smart thing is they turn tail and they run at times because they don't really have a choice.
But
So
it's realistic.
and it's realistic. So people tend to enjoy that. And they emulate it with it too. Most of us in our day-to-day lives don't have supreme power. We can't just wave our hand and make our problems go away. We have to deal with them. And I think people see that.
So while we're on this track, I'm going to go ahead to the battle scenes. Now,
Yes.
while reading the battle scenes, I was like, okay, I'm visualizing this, but writing it, remembering who left whose knife and whom, and who lost their axe, and all of this has got to be like very head spinning.
I cheat a little bit because I don't. While my battle scenes are good, I tend to limit the number of people fighting all at once. That's one thing that does help me.
You cheat! No.
Yes. And two, I like fight scenes, and I have seen so many movies where people are fighting, and it's very easy for me to visualize how I want a fight to go, right? So it ends up being you see it all in your mind and you see the flow. And the hardest thing is often putting it into words, right? Because you don't want to. The key to writing good fight scenes is your words have to be short and quick and violent, right? So you need to use
because it's violent.
Yes, you need to use words that show that. You need to use words that show violence. Because you're trying to show and not tell the action, you can describe it, but only to a limited way. The other thing is when you're actually committing violence, you're never really doing anything as fancy as is shown in film and television. And even in some books, this whole idea that people are going to be pirouetting and dancing and, flipping.
You're not buying
it? No one believes that. No one believes that.
No, because you just want to stay alive.
Exactly. If you've actually ever seen real gladiators fight. Like it's brutal, short, and quick. The same thing goes. Go look at fencing matches, right? Short, brutal, quick. Those pokes to the chest happen very quickly, and the same thing goes for any sort of like kendo, right? If you ever seen kendo, bushido, Japanese style fighting with the katanas, they are so fast and quick, right? So yes, you can try to extend fight scenes and add depth and dimension, but it needs to be short, quick, and violent. That's a rule.
Sure. And yeah, I can tell because they're very visual, like, which sounds weird when you're reading them, but I find myself visualizing them. So yeah, that works. Like for me,
But
anyways.
there is. I very rarely don't finish a book. I love to read, and I can accept all sorts of things. There was one book that I literally, in the middle of it, when he started the first description of the first fight scene, I took the book, I closed it, and I put it aside, because instead of describing the battle, like creating a visual element for the battle, he wrote the sounds, right? And anyone who's read a lot of fantasy knows exactly who I'm talking about. He wrote the sounds, and he told you what was happening. He didn't create a visual medium for you, and it just didn't work, right? So anything that you're going to do in writing, first of all, you have to show and show it nicely and show it in a way that people can understand it, and do it quickly. There are, I know personally, many people, if a fight scene is too long, they'll skip over it to get back to the conversation, the drama, and the
Oh,
tension.
yes. I mean, this is my thing about world building. I love Tolkien. I love the world that he
Mm-hmm.
built. But I'm not saying I ever finished reading that third book, or that I don't go ahead 10 pages and then get frustrated that I've lost some action because it took 10 pages to describe a mountain. So, yes, love the man, love the aesthetic, love the ideas. Just too much can be too much.
Yes. And
So,
listen, as always, styles change over time. But I think there's a happy medium of being able to describe something. And I personally feel that your imagination needs to fill in the gaps, right? Obviously, I'm not just going to say there's a room, right? But you can describe parts of the room and let the reader's imagination fill in the gaps. You can describe the tree, right? And let the reader's imagination fill in the gaps. So if you, and this is always a fun experiment, right? Uh, Next time you have a book club or a friend over and you're talking about a book, pick one of the favorite characters you have in a book, right? And ask them what that character looks like. And you're both going to come up with completely different descriptions. And that's a general idea. That's when you know that, the author has given you room to imagine in a story. And I think that's super important. That's also how we become far more engaged, is because they've left enough room for you to create part of the story yourself.
yeah, no, I agree entirely because your experiences, the writer loses control of the book once the reader picks it up,
Yes.
because their experiences are going to interpret things and what is happening in the book. I can spend hours imagining what narcissists look like. Okay.
That's wrong. That's wrong. That's wrong on so many different levels.
And I know, and David is watching this, so I had to go out there. I believe he's listening right now, so I better not look at the comments.
It's not my fault. Not my fault.
It's not your fault. That was bad. Okay. I told you I maybe I identify with Lilith too much. Or Cruella de Vil or whoever. I mean, so, okay, so we established that you didn't just go willy-nilly, I'm writing a fantasy, I just can write whatever I wanted. You researched, and it's obvious.
Yes.
Ancient Rome, and you knew when these things were happening. Okay, so I did talk about how you created most of this myth yourself. Like there is
Yes.
no, Use or whatever. But I did realize, because I'm into that and I like to research that stuff, that there is a traditional African god mentioned, Olodumare.
Olajimer, yes. So
Olodumare, sorry.
right. So it's okay. It's very hard to pronounce a lot of these names. So the myth of the Orishai, right, which is Elohim created the world. He's the creator god, right, and at his side sits on his left and his right are his two how do you put it, like sub gods like Olorun and Olorare. And so it's really funny when you look at these ancient African religions, some of which are like the Yoruba myth, the Orishai myth, is almost 10,000 years old. It predates Christianity by quite a bit. It predates the pagan religions by quite a bit also. And unlike the Romans, they had a monolithic religion, a single deity. And it is, as far as I'm concerned, it's pretty much a precursor to Christianity, of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And the more you research it, you actually see the correlation between this ancient African belief and the Christianity that we know today. You also see the evolution of it and how you had gods like Ogun, who was the god of fire and metalsmiths, right? And you can see correlations in Hephaestus from Greek mythology. You have Eshu, who is the god of mischief and speed, and you can see correlations with Hermes and things like that. So nothing is original. It's all precursors, meaning that probably
Oh
what
yeah,
ended up
everything
happening.
builds.
Yeah,
It
someone
builds on.
always steals something from somebody else.
Yeah, yes,
But
and yeah.
but yes, so a lot of these ancient religions, form the basis of Christianity, that form the basis of the Greek pantheon. It's all laid out there because these, as I said, they all predate, the religions that follow them by many, many thousands of years.
And you mentioned Eshu in the book as well, don't you?
Yes, yes. Esther,
Yeah.
yeah, Esther's a fun character.
So
He's the equivalent of uh, a god of mischief. He likes making trouble, but he still loves humanity, and he's also the messenger of Lajimer. So he combines the portfolio of a couple of different gods, and he definitely has an interest in humanity, and he takes an interest in Vesper as well, which makes him quite fun to write. Because he enjoys making fun of humans.
they're his toys.
Amusement.
Amusements.
Well, I put it more along the lines of a parent enjoying to make fun of their kids.
Oh, I went too far. At least I'm not. I'm just bugging my husband. I'm not making fun of my children.
Oh my God, my wife and we make fun of our daughter all the time in a good way, and
No,
there's
in fun. I get it. It's not, well, everything we're doing is in fun. So. Yes. You took some things from folklore, myths, ancient religions, and some things you
like. Yes, so like Token, I'm not going to compare myself to Token. I take that back.
So, talk about narcissists.
I'm
sorry. It was a name, people. I wasn't. Okay, we're going to stop now, Rhett. Get serious.
No, okay. So if you look, Token, because it wasn't there, right? Token decided to take all the different European myths and put it together in a cohesive narrative for Europeans, right? And this is where the notion of elves and fairies and all these things come from. They're all different creations, and he put it all together and he created this wonderful, amazing world. And I was like, well, no one's really done that for Africa. We have, West African voodoo. We have Egyptian, hieroglyphs and all these things. We have the Orishai from the Yoruba, and all of these different myths, go off in different directions. And I think one of my goals with this story was to sort of put it all together into a cohesive fantasy, right? So that it is different from European fantasy. Not that there's anything wrong with European fantasy.
No,
I grew up
but it
reading it,
isn't.
and it gives us something different to play with, and
It
allows me to be original in my creation, my writing.
and to recreate what was. I think this is
Yes.
a time I've been doing this in a lot of different things, and I have a girl coming from that's working with the Netherlands and stuff. The recreation of what was, so that we can all understand where we came from. And
Absolutely.
I think that's an important thing, and because there is very little out. I mean, I think this is a noble thing that you are doing, right? I mean that seriously. It's just hard to say it to you seriously. Okay.
No, no,
And
no. It's listen. I think there is a deep culture and history and myth there that we can explore. Speaking of gaming, I played Shadowrun, right, when I was much younger, right? And one of the tenets of Shadowrun is that there's a lot of Native American myth, legend, and lore that's built into that, of nature spirits and city spirits and the spirits of man and the spirits of nature. And I learned far more than I ever imagined playing a game, right? I learned about Native American culture, their beliefs, their history, and I found it fascinating. And I was made a better person for it. I would have never, ever, ever looked this stuff up on my own. And I think the potential here is the same, right? To put African myth and legend and lore into a way that people find fascinating and interesting and entertaining. And at the end, you're learning. You're learning something about different cultures, and you're not even wanting to learn, but you enjoy it. So I think that's a great thing to do, and reading and storytelling is humanity's way of teaching one another, and I think that's a beautiful thing.
I think that's way it is a beautiful thing. And I think what you're saying is, I mean, all interests are based on that. I mean, my my kid got interested in ancient society because of Hercules and Xena, right? and
Yeah.
and the ancient world, and we do that. It is the fun that comes before the obsession, and
Yes.
and
Yes.
and the idea that we could spend a lot of time doing that, and where there isn't a lot of open um communication on something, it has to start somewhere, right? Because
Absolutely.
it
Absolutely.
comes, and I'm sure there are many people doing that in many ways all over the place. But I've been very interested in it for a while now. So this is so. And what did you use resources while you were like learning about this god or whatever?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's easier today than it would have been, say, even 20 years ago to, get information. There are, people who've written interesting papers on the pantheon of the Urashai, about Ologimer. The Yoruba religion is actually pretty interesting. They have the notion of potential energy, which is very scientific for a culture that you know um, doesn't seem to be very scientific. But a lot of the principles sound very scientific, of potential energy and of energy changing form and shape. So there's a very good chance that some of these cultures were onto things that we eventually turned into actual science. So, but yes, the internet is a wonderful place, and you can go down lots of rabbit holes at 2 in the morning
Yeah.
and find
As
and
writers
find.
tend to, instead of writing, right?
Yes, 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 yes. And
All
so
the
yeah, doing but researching it. I always had a fascination with ancient Rome, and being able to add some distinct flavor to it and something interesting to it was a lot of fun. Um, and quite frankly, the even myself, right, when I started this, um, I believed in the porcelain statue myth, right, that Rome was all white, and the porcelain statues were all white. But it turns out that most of the color has worn off and flaked away from all the statues. And the statues themselves were once very colorful, and having all different shades, and they were a glorious rainbow of colors. And so this is the thing about history. when we actually dig deeper, we find out some pretty interesting things. And I've learned about the cosmopolitan nature of that empire, and it's just made it a more interesting place for me.
So no, no. So we're spending all our time on this fascinating stuff. But you have to move on. So in summary, I'm going to say in the next section I will behave better. And then, and also that so there are 4 books in total so far
Yes,
in the prequel, and then Apprentice, Gladiatrix, and
Imperator.
yes, okay.
And
And now
Invictus is on the way soon.
yes,
Very soon, Invictus is coming.
and so there, and then after that 5, and then we have
Yes,
another entire series to look forward. There may be a
we
6,
do.
we don't know yet because we just
I'm
got
not
pick
sure. It
roll.
depends on how much I can actually. As I said, I don't want to extend the series beyond its natural story progression.
No,
When
I agree with you entirely. I'm much whether book series or television series, people let things go too long because it's making money.
yes,
Rhett doesn't care about money.
I think if you do something you love, the money will come, and if you tell a good story, people will buy it. I care about money, but I care about telling a good story first, more
And
than anything
sometimes if you
else.
put a pretty picture on the cover, they'll buy
It
it
helps.
too. And that was good,
Hey,
Mark.
we're all visual. We're all visual.
Okay, I just love that. All right, so moving on to the the Grace Harbor Mysteries, which
Yes.
I got a sneak peek of. People's, I'm blessed. This is the first time. Now, are we just calling it mysteries? Are we possibly adding something to the front of that mystery?
Well, here's the thing. Grace Harbor is not wholly my own. Grace Harbor started off with a conversation I was having with a friend of mine who wrote a book called 300 Sandwiches, a wonderful book, Stephanie Smith. She's a great author, and 300 Sandwiches was basically the story of how she met her husband. She ended up on Good Morning America and a whole bunch of these shows, and it was a very popular. It was her blog, but she wanted to write something on the fiction side to create. And I started off just by coaching her on how to create the background of a story and the genesis of an idea. And from those conversations, we're like, well, maybe we should just write a book together. This seems to be something that we can both, throw together. And so this is a bit of a departure for me. Um, and Stephanie did most of the work. I just sort of, put the ideas into place. But the general idea is this is actually set in the late 70s and the early 80s, and it is urban fantasy, so you've got a lot of
That's
mystery
what
elements in
we're
there.
calling it. Yeah.
And yeah, but as far as the name goes, this is also something that's going to be with a mainstream publisher. So the final title, what it will be, I don't know at this point because that's still up in the air. But yeah, the basis of the series will be the Grace Harbor Mysteries, and we'll probably put subtitles in there afterwards.
Like urban fantasy or paranormal
Well, the
mystery
notion
or
of the notion of the Grace Harbor Mysteries was sort of like almost like we picked an idea because Charlene Harris has the Southern Vampire Mysteries, right? And I thought it would flow well off the tongue. And so each one of Charlene Harris's books in that series has an individual title, right? And I think what's going to happen is going to be
it's
called the
there
Grace Harbor Mysteries and have a little title
each
for the
for
book.
each of
So
them.
that will be the title of the series. And listen, everyone who's read it has loved it. We have a good deal of interest from mainstream publishers. We've gotten an agent, and they are shopping it around at the moment. But it's a different type of book. It's interesting, and I enjoyed writing it.
And so I was going to ask you, but I think I know the answer. Like in that situation where you're co-writing, if there is a creative difference, how do you settle? How do you settle it?
I win. No.
No, but it sounds to me more like you're letting her take lead on this because.
Well, here's the thing. We're both reasonable people, and I guess depending on I know that there are authors who get involved in co-writing situations that it ends up being a nightmare because there just isn't cooperation. But we tend to think along the same paths, so there haven't really been creative differences at this point. We did a series Bible, right, and we can see at least 3 books in the series, so we have a pretty good idea of where it's going. Getting into a fight over the nitty gritty seems like a bit of a waste of time and energy.
Yeah, no, you have to,
But
especially if it's going to an editor. You're going to have to let go of some stuff anyway.
oh, absolutely. So,
can't.
you know, again, Stephen King says, kill your darlings. And I think that's what's going to happen. You know, the book is pretty big at this point, and I think we're probably going to have to edit it down and take out some things here and there. But this series definitely, as far as ideas go, it definitely shows cultural differences. There's a lot of fun with culture here because it is set in Chicago in the 70s and the 80s.
Yeah.
There is some interesting cultural elements between. So, for example, Grace herself is African American, and her partner throughout the series is actually a Polish immigrant, right? Who has some interesting personality quirks. Grace herself has some interesting personality quirks too, but definitely the police officer that she works with.
But I like him. He's nice.
Exactly. That's the thing. You know, he's one of those characters that says what's on his mind. He's not shy.
Well, you know what? I almost think that in today, because we're fixing everybody's problems, right? If somebody has a speech problem or whatever, we have to fix it.
Yes.
And that's messing with characters. Like growing up, I remember there was one mystery, and I can't think of it top of my head, but he wouldn't leave his house. He was a rich guy, and he had all these people running to find his clues, but he wouldn't leave his house. And that made for a lot. I'm trying to think. It was on.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, but we wouldn't get him now, right? Because he would have to leave the house or be fixed. You know, and there's all these little quirks that make. Well, there is Monk. I do like Monk, but there is all these little quirks that make a person a person.
Yes, like you wouldn't be able to make Monk today. I'm sorry, you wouldn't. And there are actually, but that's just it. Sometimes.
Okay.
Sometimes.
Brian says it's the Nero Wolf series, and he's right. Okay, it is Nero Wolf.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Brian. You're coming. You're always so good. Okay, we have a couple questions by Brian, so we'll just do that because he helped me out today, so I don't go around saying.
No problem.
What's that? In your formative years, however you define yourself as an author, were you influenced more by specific authors or specific genres?
Definitely specific genres. So I read anything and everything fantasy growing up. I read all the big ones, obviously, and you know, Robert Jordan also played a big role in his Wheel of Time series. Was absolutely my favorite series of books ever written, and the notion of having rules in place of setting things up is actually one of the core elements that he has in his writing as well. Mr. Jordan unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, but I love the Wheel of Time series, and it really influenced me in a lot of different ways. Obviously, things like Star Wars do have an influence, and you know, the spiritual aspect of Star Wars, not necessarily the fighting and the sci-fi, but this notion again of connection that definitely made me who I am as an author.
Oh. That makes sense. And I can see the Star Wars connection too, because it's settling differences between co-authors might best be done through trial by combat. Example, baking muffins judged by spouses. in Rhett's case, that would be cinnamon buns.
Probably.
And then we go to the fact that it was the Nero Wolf series, and I will not have to be freaking out here anymore thinking, what's that series? I didn't imagine it. It was real. So
it was real. It was real.
It was real. So yes. So What we were saying is we have decided to perfect humanity, as it were.
Unfortunately, yes. But the humans we love are usually the most flawed.
Right. And they have learned things because of those flaws. They've had
Yes.
to walk out there in society and they've learned they're bigger than their flaws, or that people aren't always kind, but they still are, or, you know, they become
Well,
me. No.
well,
Evil.
well, one thing I heard recently, and it really had a profound effect on me, is that there are two types of people. There are people who will say nice things but do mean things, and there are people who will say mean things but do nice things, right? So be careful and judge people on their actions, not on what they say to you. You know,
Exactly.
it's very easy to say how people say how wonderful you are and how kind you are, and then walk away when you need help. Whereas there are people who will tell you the truth and say some pretty horrible things, but when you need help, they'll be there to help you. So it's always
Well, and
be,
sometimes those things are meant for, say, for example, Simon Cowell, who is hated by many, but he says that so people don't spend their time and their money getting abused
yes,
for something that's
yes.
not going to happen. So,
We have become a society that's not able to handle the truth, especially if it's told in a blunt way,
but then
right?
that is where, yeah, yes. Well, I mean, and the truth is blunt. Like, you can't, you can't sugarcoat everything with a little bit of cinnamon and make it.
We can try.
We can
I mean,
try.
there are nice ways to say things, obviously. Not everything has to be told in a blunt manner, but sometimes that's what you need to hear. You need to be told things in a rough way to actually accept them. Because if you try to sugarcoat it too often, people hear what they want to hear as opposed to the truth.
And that makes that crusty old character. I think
Yes,
I think being a reader or writer, like being a writer, you have to be observant of life,
yes,
right? You know,
absolutely.
don't have coffee beside me because I'm gonna pick something up and jot it down, right? Not in a bad way, but yeah, we're taking notes. And as a reader, we learn what's behind that. Like you're going back to tell Lilith's story. We learn
Yes,
what's behind that crusty old, um, sailor or whatever. And so I think it works on both ways in that. But yeah, there are nice ways to say things with a
yes.
coffee
So,
in a cinnamon bun.
you
So
know, also, in the Grace Harbor series, we end up having to tell a fairly modern story, right? And it was interesting writing it because we are writing in the 70s and the 80s. So there are no cell phones. There are very limited, the technology we take for granted today is just not there. We've had to use payphones. People still read newspapers. So you get to actually be immersed in the culture and the technology of the 70s and the 80s. Uh, I am old enough to remember those times, and
but not really old enough to have lived in them, right?
oh,
Maybe
a little bit,
um
and
yeah, you go ahead.
yeah, and so some of the, especially a lot of the vehicles, like I have a good memory for cars and what things look like and what they smell like, and so we get to put a lot of that in there, and it makes for some interesting storytelling. Um,
I can see with the cars because I actually felt like I was back then as a small child. And sitting in those cars and feeling it. And I
yes,
was going to ask you that too because it's not Rome. There are people
no.
that do remember that time. I mean, did you feel like you had to be more careful about anorex?
Well, here's the thing. The book is set in Chicago, and Stephanie is from Chicago. She grew up in
So
Chicago.
she knew.
So she knew. So that's
Okay, that
where,
helps too.
yeah, that helps that she grew up in that city. She knows that city. Her mom still lives there. And so the visceral feel and smell and, you know, um, the beat of the place, right? Every city has a certain heartbeat. And she knows the heartbeat of Chicago. And
Oh, I
so
like that.
it translated really well into the story because we could talk about places, we could talk about diners, we could talk about specific streets and what it's like walking down that street, right? And so that allows you to immerse the reader in a place. Anne Rice was famous for doing that with New Orleans, right? I read Anne Rice books, and when I actually went to New Orleans, I was like, wow, I feel like I've been here because I've read the books like this. And so that's one of the feelings we're trying to get in
Well, that
any of
needs to
those
go on
Harvard
a
mysteries.
back cover or something. Like Stephanie knows the heartbeat of Chicago.
We'll put that in there. That's good. That's good.
Because she was growing up there. Because I like that, and I'm gonna have to interview Stephanie just so I get to say that.
I'll get her. I'll get her your number.
Okay, and Brian, I'm not putting it, but Brian, are you directing this at me, Brian? One can be blunt but still respectful. Always respectful, but no, it's true. It's not a personal shot. It's a fact shot. I mean, I think that's what the confusion is. Facts. If you carried something and dropped it, the fact is you dropped it. So it's not being like, no, I didn't drop it. But, if someone's suggesting a better way to carry it, you can't get the suggestion without accepting the fact that you dropped it first.
Exactly.
It is. Okay, so I'm going to go. We have 4 more minutes left. And I told you it would go fast. It's not 2 hours anymore.
It doesn't feel like it. Not at all.
It just goes. I wanted to say Endor. I'm not even a Star Wars fan. Or do we say that Andor? But I thought it was incredible. I thought it was the noir of Star Wars. It almost reminded me of like a spy movie, like a Cold War.
Well, you know what? It does something that hasn't been done in Star Wars. Is it dug deep? So Star Wars is this giant iceberg, right? And George Lucas, when he created it, we see the top of the iceberg. The top of the iceberg is the Skywalker saga. It's stormtroopers and lightsabers and Jedi. It's a beautiful thing. But the way that Star Wars is created is that you can imagine, your imagination takes you under the water to the massive part of the iceberg. And this is the first time we've gone under the water and seen the lower levels of Star Wars, how the regular people live, how Mr. and Madame Tout le Monde, sorry, I'm French Canadian, how the everyday person lives and their struggles. The struggles that Cassian face, the struggles that Mon Mothma faces in this story are phenomenal. And the main character played by Stellan Skarsgård, that I think that's the role of his career.
Well, yeah,
God.
But he's had so many roles of his career. He's such a fantastic actor. You're pulling this one.
One of my friends said at the time when he saw that Stellan Skarsgård was in the series, he says, "Oh, he's a great bit actor, but he can't." No, he literally said, "Well, he can't helm a series. He can't be the lead actor." I think in this series, he showed he could be a lead actor in a series because he was so brilliant in it.
I think so. He's incredible. And I want to say to the world at large, when I say I'm not a Star Wars fan, I live in a house with I live in a house where my basement is full of Star Wars merchandise. So I like Star Wars. I consider it a movie, but I don't like it as much as some other people in our house. So I just thought I better.
To finish on the Star Wars note, my wife and I have an argument. My wife does not like Star Wars. My wife is like you. She watches it because, I happen to be around. And she loves musicals. And we have this constant battle with our daughter where we're trying to convince her to follow what we love, our passion. So I'm trying to convince my daughter to love Star Wars. And my wife is trying to convince her to love musicals. So far, my wife is winning. But I'm holding out.
Well, she's got Disney on her side, right? So it's
she has Disney on her side. And, Adele watched Grease and she loved it. She watched the new Matilda musical and she loved it. And I'm just watching like, no, I'm going to lose this fight.
You never know, though. They change a lot.
They change a lot. I'm holding out hope for puberty, and she watched a fight scene between Anakin and Obi-Wan, and she liked that. right? And she was quoting it for a week as a meme. But that's the best I've gotten so
Well,
far.
and it depends on what's in when it comes her time, because you can't force them to love what we
No,
love,
no,
right?
you
And it's a
can't.
different time. And on that note, I'm going to have to say goodbye, Rhett, but you'll need to come back again because
I will.
I can't even remember what we talked about. I'm not re-listening to this because I don't know what
Well, when
word.
like I said, I should have about 3 books coming out this year, between The Last Witch of Rome and Grace Harbor, and so I'll definitely come back on to let everybody know that they're out there and they're ready to be enjoyed. So I thank you so much for having me. It's been a
Oh no,
pleasure.
it's
It's
been
always
fun.
like the time really does fly when I talk to you. It's kind of crazy. So I had a great time, and I'm going to be in a good mood for the rest of the day now.
Oh, good, good. Okay, all right. You take care, and we will talk to you later. Okay. Okay. Bye
Thank you.
bye. Okay. Well, that was fun. Next week, our guest will be Janice J. Richardson. She is the author of the Spencer Funeral Home Cozy Mystery Series. She also has a standalone literary novel called Fading Expectations about us two mothers and their special needs children, which is a great, great read. And she has a new series coming out as well, which she can talk more about. Until then, and may your coffee be hot and your stories sweet. Thank you for listening, everyone, and have a good week.